Why is it that most of the stories on your channel sound like they've been written by complete idiots? Bar this, bar that. That's all some guys seem to think Thailand is about. I'm not an idiot. I was just led down the garden path and lost money due to dishonesty by other people, not because I made some stupid decisions. I'm not all high and mighty. Feel free to say what you want. But my world came crashing down in Thailand when I got involved in a property deal that was meant to make me a lot of money. I didn't get into this from nothing. There seems to be a consistent narrative. Guys come to Thailand, start a business with no prior business experience, and it doesn't work. What a surprise! Usually the people who are successful coming to Thailand to do business have been successful in their own countries, and these people are aware that things are more difficult in Thailand. I was well aware things were more difficult in Thailand, but this was meant to be a challenge and an exciting project in a country I had always enjoyed visiting. I put myself well ahead of the other guys who have written stories in. I'm not a low intellect individual. I have a high IQ, and I have been successful for the most part of my life. I'm in property. I know what I was doing, and I made money. So it is with this understanding that I decided to invest in a property project in Phuket. I wasn't born wealthy, or with a silver spoon in my mouth. My parents worked hand to mouth in order to provide for me and my two siblings. Our summer holidays were driving to Devon or Cornwall, while the children from school went overseas. I want to add this to the story to say that I didn't have a free ride. I was smart, invested, and built a great business that I was extremely proud of. Not to mention, I worked like a dog. It might have been a fortuitous time, but that opportunity was available to everyone, and not everyone grabbed it. When I was 18, I had already been working part-time for 4 years. I put in endless hours, washing dishes at a local pub, waiting tables, cleaning people's cars, cutting people's grass. I had a paper round. Every single thing I could do to make a little bit of extra money. And by the time I was 18, I had £20,000. That might sound like a lot, but if I wasn't at school, I was working. I put in 5 hours in the evenings every day, 10 hours on Saturday, 10 hours on Sunday, and I was putting in more hours than most adults that worked. And I wasn't paid a lot per hour, but it all added up, and I never spent any of it. It was 1995 when I turned 18, and I took the money that I earned and purchased a small house in my area. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and I paid £18,000 for it. Over the next 2 years, I worked constantly. There wasn't one day that I took off. That's no exaggeration. But what it did do was allow me to buy another house. It was actually the one right next door to me. £26,000 I paid for that, and prices were already on the way up, and I rented that one out. It was my dream to own all the houses on that street. It's quite difficult to describe the street. It wasn't big and long, like some streets, but there were 6 terraced houses parallel to the main road. You have the road running along, and you turned right down onto the street, and all the houses were on the left. These houses were back to back to houses on the adjoining street. To the right, there were other houses, however these were not accessed from my street. And at the end of the street, it was a dead end. I wanted all 6 of these, and that was my single-minded ambition. That never became a reality. I started looking further afield, but it was here that my love of property began. I don't own those ones anymore, unfortunately, but that was where I thought I would go to remember where the start of my empire came from. Thinking big. I was 20, owned 2 houses with no mortgage, and I was still working as hard as I could with no end in sight. I didn't know if it was because I saw my parents struggle and I didn't want to be like them, or if it was that I was just built in a way that told me I needed to succeed at all costs. I was relentless, and over the next 2 years, I'd bought another house. This was in a different area, and I bought it for £28,000. I didn't know that the house prices would do what they did over the course of my life. I was investing because I saw property as a place to park money. This house that I bought for £28,000 wasn't like the others. It was semi-detached, about 2 miles away, and it needed a complete refurbishment. Everything needed doing to it. I was lucky that I was able to do a lot of the work myself, and I had friends who worked as electricians or plumbers, and they helped me to get it finished. I spent about £7,000 fixing up that house. I did it on a shoestring budget, but it was valued after I'd done it for £42,000. That's when I thought about flipping houses for a profit, as opposed to keeping them and renting them out. I sold that house and got £43,000 for it, and I started to look for another house, slightly more expensive, to do the same thing. And I did it again and made another small profit. And it was only 2 years later that I had purchased another house to add to my rental portfolio, now of 3 houses, and I had enough to buy another house to flip. I always felt that my life should be turned into a film. I think it would make a fantastic watch for people looking how to succeed. Grit and determination count for so much. You also need lady luck on your side. You need to be able to put yourself in a position to be lucky. I think that's what many people fail to understand. Oh, you were lucky, they said. You bought in at the right time. When I say to them, you could have bought in and done the same thing, but you were too busy travelling and going on holiday and buying unnecessary things that you chose to spend your money on something else. I put myself in a position to be lucky, but it wasn't without extremely hard work and graft. I bought another house to flip, and when I owned that, I had 4 houses completely paid off with no mortgages. I hadn't started to use leverage at this point. That was something I would do later. I made about 10 grand on that house flip, only 4 months from me buying it and receiving an offer. And then I had a different idea. There was a grand old stately home adjacent to the big main road not far away from where I had my houses. It was up for sale for £175,000. It needed completely redoing, both inside and out, and there was a big garden that I thought would be perfect to build on. If you know the UK market, you'll have heard of Rightmove. This house I'm talking about is actually for sale right now for £950,000. Based on what my other houses were worth, I thought I could sell them, buy this big place, and I might need to borrow a little bit of money for the renovations. I could then apply for planning permission on the land at the back, sell the house at the front, keep the land, and use the proceeds to build 2 or 3 houses. On paper, that sounds extremely easy, but it was 3 years of even more hard work. It took 6 months to renovate the house, cost a lot, but when it was done, it was worth $295,000. That was a $75,000 profit, and during the time that I was doing the renovation, I applied for and was granted planning permission for 3 detached houses at the back. Building a house from scratch was a little beyond my pay grade. I would need to find someone to build them for me. With the cash I had and £100,000 I borrowed, 3 detached houses were built. When they were complete, each one valued at £130,000, I sold one of them to pay off the loan, giving me £30,000 cash, and I kept the other 2 and rented them out. I was moving in the right direction, loving life, extremely busy, but most of all, extremely proud of my achievements because I was not even close to turning 30. I didn't have much time to date. Hardly ever would I meet anyone unless there was some business aspect to it. I thought it was about time I treated myself. Lots of my friends had been travelling. You know, the ones who complained that they missed out. They didn't miss out, they just chose other things. Now I was going to be able to travel with something to back me up. I didn't know where I wanted to go, but I thought Singapore sounded great. Don't know what it was that made me want to go there. No, that's a complete lie. I know exactly what it was that made me go to Singapore. Rogue Trader. If you've seen the film, you know. I felt like I was him, without making the stupid mistakes or doing anything illegal, in a different industry. But I just loved that film, and that's why I wanted to go to Singapore. It was 2002, I think, and it was to be my first break, really, since I was 14. And I flew business class, 25 years old, and ready to see what Singapore was like. It was wonderful. especially 20 odd years ago. If you could have seen the direction Singapore was going to continue down, you'd have done well investing at that time. Being in property, I did spend a few days looking around at the available properties. I should have sold all my houses and invested in Singapore. Did I miss out by not doing that? Yes. Did I have the opportunity to do it? Yes. But I didn't take the opportunity, and that was purely my own error. I caught the travelling bug. Through speaking to an English guy who had lived in Singapore most of his life, he was even a naturalised citizen, he said he loved it there. He was recruited there decades ago, and his vision of that part of the world was that it was going to quickly catch up and at some point in the future take over the West. He was saying you didn't expect it to happen anytime soon, but over the next 20 years, he saw things in this part of the world changing dramatically. He talked about his love of Malaysia, but most of all Thailand. He took his family to Thailand for regular holidays, with it being only a short distance away from Singapore. He talked about Thailand at length, enough for me to decide I needed to go there as well. But not before going to Malaysia. Another film, Entrapment, that sealed the deal for me to go there. I called my airline and changed my ticket for a few more weeks' time. I'd have to come back to Singapore to fly home. But I wasn't ready to go home yet, and after thoroughly enjoying everything about Singapore, I went to Malaysia. Another wonderful country, and the Petronas Towers were something special. Kuala Lumpur, then Penang, and it was when I was in Penang, Georgetown more specifically, that I saw a beautiful old building for sale, historic, from the colonial times, and it was beautiful. I could have sold one of my houses and bought it. I wish I did, because it's worth an obscene amount of money now. Those buildings in Georgetown are amazing. It was then that I went to Thailand. When I got there, my first impression wasn't as good as I was expecting it to be. Initially, I thought that I preferred Singapore and Malaysia, far more than Thailand. I always felt like Malaysia was a combination of Singapore and Thailand. But that being said, Thailand did start to growing me after only being there for a day or two. It was very different to what I was expecting, but I thought Bangkok was a wonderful city. Phuket, like the guy in Singapore said, was great. It became my favourite place in the world, and I wanted to spend more time there. I wasn't attracted to Thailand because of the bars. I went to the bars occasionally. Who didn't? Who wouldn't? But that wasn't the be-all and end-all of Thailand like it was for many guys, and I had no interest in the girls that worked there. But the girls in Thailand, the ones who didn't work in the bars, were something else. And because I was on holiday, in relaxed mode for the first time ever, I was able to notice the girls. I had a great time. But it was time to go home. But I just didn't feel right about myself, and I wasn't making any money. But I did vow to return to Thailand as soon as I could. Singapore as well. When I got home, I got back a different person. My mind had been opened to a different part of the world, and when I got back into work, an opportunity came up which involved me selling my 2 remaining houses. I managed to get £300,000 for both of them, and I used this money to buy another old house that was in need of total renovation. It was a lot bigger than the last one, and it was on 10 acres. The land was never going to get planning permission, but I thought this would be my house. The house cost £250,000. That was a lot of money back then in my area, especially for a house in need of total renovation. And I put all my money into it, plus about a 30 grand loan. That was 9 months of my life doing that house, but when it was finished, I was extremely proud. All in, it had cost me about 350,000, and it was valued at 465. I wasn't expecting that. That was a huge amount of money for a house. I mean, it was massive. 9 bedrooms, each with its own bathroom, and that's when I started to use leverage to my advantage. But before that, it was time to go for another holiday, and of course it had to be back to Thailand. I didn't bother going to Singapore that time. I felt like I'd seen everything Singapore had, but there was still so much of Thailand I hadn't. Malaysia didn't really tempt me to return, so I flew to Thailand for some much-deserved rest. It was on that holiday that I met a girl that would become my wife. Nope, I didn't meet her in a bar. And yes, we are still together. She worked at a hotel in Phuket, the one I was staying at. And I was checking into the hotel and the receptionist was new, or slow, I don't know which one, and I will admit to being an impatient person. I don't lose my temper, but I like things to be done, go, 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 and she was really taking her time. Another girl walked across and asked if everything was okay, and I smiled and said yes, but it's taking a bit longer than it should have been. And then she took over, and it turns out she was the reception manager. After extending my stay for over 2 months in Thailand, because not long after that first interaction, we're going out on dates together, I felt like I'd found the love of my life. She was only 3 years younger than me, but she was perfect, and to this day, she is still perfect. No matter the traumatic event that happened in our lives, she still stands by me. I left for home and knew I needed to get her to move to England with me. We kept in touch, but I had an awful lot of things to do before I could think about going back to Thailand. It was the first time that work became a chore as opposed to a pleasure. But I borrowed 70% of the value of the house, and I bought 3 small houses and another one to renovate and flip. 6 months later, that was sold, and the rental income from the 3 houses is more than covering the mortgage, and I had about 100 grand or thereabouts for the next project. I wasn't prepared to start that until I was living with her. We were speaking on the phone every day, and I needed to be with her. I went back to Thailand and we got married, and 3 months later she had a spouse visa and was living in England with me. Work became enjoyable again. My new wife was great at all the paperwork. That was the biggest thing I didn't like, dealing with all that, and she was able to do it flawlessly. She had a degree in business management. I didn't have a degree, but her degree allowed her to really help with the administration side of things, which freed my time up considerably. Over the next 10 years, the property market in England continued to reach new highs, and we completed lots of projects successfully. But I was starting to get worn out. The constant looking for new things to do, the constant headache of dealing with problems, workmen not showing up, doing things wrong, waiting for solicitors to do their job. That was the worst thing for me. I since learned in Thailand how easy it is to buy property. You go with the owner to the land office and they change ownership and you pay some money right there and then, and it's done on the same day. In England, each property transaction was taking 2 or 3 months to complete, and it was really starting to wear me down. I think that's the best thing to say. It was wearing me down, and I'd had enough of it. If I put it into words, what we had at that moment in time, my main house that I'd kept, I finally paid off the mortgage. We had 6 rentals and somewhere around 100 to 150,000 in cash. That cash was meant for the next project, but it was the first time in my life where I felt like I just couldn't be bothered anymore. I should also mention that everything I had was fully paid off. It was extremely hard work, every day, for years, for me to get there, and I did benefit greatly from the increase in property prices, but you had to be in it to win it. Never forget that. I'd say we're probably in around 2015 at this point. I'd have been 38 years old, and the income that the rentals were generating was more than enough for both of us to have to never work again and live a more peaceful and relaxed life. That's what we planned to do. We've been going to Thailand as often as we could, but we probably only managed to make it once every 2 years. But we decided, let's take a year to think about things. If we get the newfound urge to do something again, we can, or if we don't need to. I wanted to play things by ear, and my wife thought that was a great idea. She'd worked really hard as well, and not having to do the paperwork anymore for me was great. It made things easier. I hated it, having to bury my head in paperwork. We flew to Thailand with no plans, no ideas, apart from to just enjoy ourselves for as long as we wanted to. If that was going to be forever, so be it. If it was only going to be for 6 months, when we had the urge to do something, that was fine as well. That was the beauty of being in that position, but it didn't come without working constantly with no break. I guess that's what separates people who make it from people who don't. The people who make it understand really just how much work you have to put in. The people who don't think they're working hard, but they have no idea. When we arrived in Thailand, we checked into a wonderful hotel in Phuket. There was this never-ending boom going on in Thailand. new condos being built, new housing projects, and I've seen some people come and make fortunes overnight. I still didn't feel like I was particularly well off. Well, I didn't have to work anymore, but it's not like I could just go to the Ferrari dealership on a whim and buy a new car. That's where I wanted to be. That was where my ambition saw me being, and as soon as we had spent a few days in Phuket, I was over this rest and relaxation phase. My wife wasn't. She was ready to kick back and relax for a bit longer, but I was getting itchy feet, so while she was lounging by the pool, under an umbrella of course to avoid the sun, I was getting in touch with estate agents around Phuket, just to see what the market was like. It was very different to how it was at home, and I was under no illusion that investing in Thailand was going to be more difficult. In England, it seems to follow a similar pattern. You buy a house, and a year later it's worth more, and you sell it. If you put renovation work into it, you're going to make more profit, if you know what you're doing. I think I've always simplified it, but I didn't know what the process was in Thailand. And houses don't sell as quickly as they did at home, but I was intrigued. I felt like doing something in Thailand would be completely new. Little did I know that I would make the most monumental blunder I ever made. However, I don't fully blame myself for it. There were many unscrupulous people in Thailand, people who you shouldn't trust, and I guess it was me putting trust into people who didn't deserve trust that was the reason behind it. Still though, at a minimum, it is 90% my fault because I trusted them. That means that they did their job better than me. I suppose that's the way I like to look at it. That wasn't going to come for a while though. My wife convinced me to just relax for a bit and calm down. And as much as I fought against the urges to look for the next opportunity, I did calm down and we spent 3 months in Phuket, not doing much of anything. But when that 3 months came to an end, I was ready. As much as I was interested in Phuket, we decided to go back to England and see what other projects we were able to do there. When you're away from something you love, even if it's worn you out, you'll eventually want to go back. And when we were back, we both felt like we had a new lease on life. We decided to have our 6 rentals valued. All of these had been bought and renovated and kept. And when they were all valued at an average of £120,000 each, that was when I thought I'd made it. We probably didn't even put half of that into each of the houses, so that was a nice profit there. We still had the cash in the bank that was meant to be for the next project, apart from about £15,000 we spent in Thailand across the 3 months we were there. But if we sold all the rentals, added in that cash, we'd have just under £1 million, plus my main house. If you can remember me saying that my main house had 10 acres of land, and telling you that there was no chance that the land would get planning permission. Part of the land was adjoining a road which was next to a new housing estate, which had just been finished. And that was when I decided to put in an application to build 10 houses on the bottom 2 acres of land that had just been changed because of this addition of the new housing estate. It was a long shot, but it was approved, unbelievably. That was blind luck. When I bought it, there was no chance any of the land would get planning permission, no chance at all. But as time went by and land changes and things get built close by, that means other land needs to be opened up. 10 big detached houses to be built on 2 acres, and the original idea was to sell the rentals and build them myself before selling them on. But when I was offered £700,000 for those 2 acres that now had planning permission, I'll admit to that being lucky. But you have to be there, and you have to be in it to win it. There was no point selling the rentals, and we just sold the land. I still had 8 acres. The land that was for the house was right at the other side, so because of the terrain, which was quite hilly, you couldn't even see the new houses that were going to be built. And I got 700 grand for that. I will admit that that's not really a fair system, but you have to play the game. That felt similar to a lottery win. We were looking around for things to do. I thought about adding to our rental portfolio, but the houses were now too expensive, I felt, to be worth investing in. They were becoming more expensive, but that would mean you could rent them out for more. But even still, I wanted to be able to buy houses at 50 or 60 grand, and you couldn't do that anymore in my area. So we decided to go to Thailand and look for opportunities there instead. We got to Thailand, first to Bangkok, and I liked the idea of building a condo building. I really liked the sound of that. but that was way out of my pay grade. Looking at land in central Bangkok, I would need to sell everything I had 10 times over just to be able to afford the land. I quickly realised that was for the big boys. There were housing projects on the outskirts of Bangkok, but again, that was slightly more than we would have needed to spend. And Bangkok was not a beautiful place. It's a great city, but it's not beautiful to the eye like Phuket. And Phuket was always my favourite place, so we went down there to look for things to do. There were so many new build condos that you could invest in, but that just seemed like, although you could make a return, you're not necessarily going to make a big profit on a project. I didn't want to park money in property in Thailand. I wanted to make property in Thailand and then sell it. We spent 2 months in Phuket, driving around the island, looking at all the different areas, picking out which we liked best and which we didn't, and speaking to all the real estate agents on the island, other people who had invested in property, and we started to build a picture in our minds of what it was like. There were so many projects going on. One really interested us right on the beach. $1 million mansions, and there were 10 of them. That would have been the perfect sort of development to get into. This project was already complete, and when we're touring houses, I'm thinking about my house in England. Should I sell it and buy one of these instead? I never did that, but it was tempting. It was then that we were introduced by an estate agent to a developer. They were in the planning stages for a project that was close by, and it looked similar to the one we were at. It was going to be a bit smaller, 6 houses across 3 rai of land. They already had the land and some of the funding, and they needed a bit more of the funding in order to be able to become fully funded. These houses were going to be something else, even bigger than the ones we'd seen, and they were going to be priced very high at around 40 million baht. We were sold on the project, and we're coming to the end of 2016. The biggest problem that we faced was the cash that we had in England from selling the land, plus the other cash I had, after tax around 600,000. It was worth considerably less than it was at the start of 2016. But one of the things I always did was to try to ignore things completely out of my control. The exchange rate was out of my control, so that was something I would have to overlook. The fact that that 600 grand at the start of 2016 would have been worth 31 and a bit million baht. When we were looking into this, 600 grand was now worth just under 27 million baht. That's a rental property right there. Out of my control, so we can't do anything about it, so we have to say never mind. We were very interested in this project. They had already started construction on 2 of the houses, and they seemed to be going well. We were offered an opportunity to invest 25 million baht in return from one of the completed houses. Because we were investing at the early stage, this would help the first houses to be completed, which could be sold, and then more houses could be built. The 8th out of the 10 houses was going to be ours, and it could have been 2 or 3 years before it was ready. We didn't rush into it. We didn't just hand over the money and say, here you go, have at it. There was a 2-month due diligence process. I employed a great lawyer from Bangkok to make sure all the paperwork checked out. I was aware of houses being built on land that shouldn't have been issued full title deeds. I'd seen people having problems with this, so I made sure with my lawyer that this wasn't going to be a problem for this project. He did his work, and a few weeks later he comes back saying there's no problem with the land. It's never been part of a national park. Its boundaries are accurately marked, as are the land boundaries on the adjoining land. There's no problem with the land. That was the first hurdle to get out of the way. The next was to check the status of the company. My lawyer did his work again. He had a few meetings with the directors of the company. We found out about other projects they'd done in the past, which we went to look at to verify. We even looked inside houses that they'd built to check on the construction quality, and everything looked great. We even found somebody who had invested in one of their previous projects. He was living in one of the houses. He said he did a similar thing to me. This happened to be on a smaller scale, but even still, it seemed to have worked out well, and it was a great investment for him. So the land is fine. The company seems to have been in business for years and has built many successful projects. This project has already started construction and 2 houses are underway. What could possibly go wrong? Even with all that information, it wasn't going to be an easy decision to invest. Part of me was thinking, this just sounds like we're buying a house off plan. But if you're buying a house off plan, you don't have to give all the money up front. It wasn't like that. This was an investment so that the project could continue, and because it could continue, that's why we were going to profit down the line. When we had all the information, we decided to leave Phuket for a week to really think it through. If we invested and it worked, we could have made a 15 million baht profit in around 3 years. That is if we chose to sell the house. We could keep it and have a beautiful villa with sea views in paradise. We could probably rent that out for a fortune. We found ourselves in Pai, of all places, right in the north of Thailand. We'd never been there before, and it was a spur-of-the-moment decision. Something completely different to any of the other Thailand experiences we'd had. But it was good in a way to be able to get a bigger picture of what Thailand was about. Do we really want to be in Thailand? Do we really want to invest in Thailand? Pai was a wonderful town, and it was there that we decided that we were going to go ahead with this investment. We'd even picked out which house was going to be ours. It was the one right at the end, with the best views. Contracts were drawn up. My lawyer looked through it in detail. He was a proper lawyer. Cost me a fortune. But everything seemed to be above board, and we invested the money. 25 million baht, most of the money I had from selling the land in England. Construction continued at the project. We actually rented a place close by so we could keep track of the progress, and it was initially very exciting to see the first house become complete. The second house got to nearly halfway complete, and then things started to slow down a bit. We weren't overly concerned. The first house was wonderful, and it was up for sale, and we saw people coming to view it. Everyone seemed to like it, but they weren't able to sell it as quickly as expected. Construction on the second house came to a complete close when it was only 60% complete. We weren't expecting that, but they said it was very temporary because another project that was going on had to take priority. Right there and then, I realized that no matter how much you can look into something, I had not looked into this enough. I was not aware that they had other ongoing projects. I'd seen lots of their projects that had been completed, but I didn't know that they had others ongoing. When we dig deeper into this, it turns out that they had 4 projects underway. I hadn't yet come to the understanding that they'd used some of my money for the other projects. I contacted my lawyer straight away to tell him about this and if there's anything we can do about it. He just said it's normal for companies to have more than one project on the go, and the agreement that we had was that we would get house number 8 with this investment. The agreement didn't specifically lay out that my money could only be used on this project. I thought it did, but I didn't check because I didn't know that they were doing other projects. I did so much due diligence, but obviously I didn't do enough. My lawyer spoke to the company, and they just said that it's taking a bit longer, and don't worry about anything, because it will be started again soon. True to their word, 2 months later, construction started on the second house, and that finished 3 months after that. No one had bought the first house yet, and now the second one was for sale. They were both priced at 43 million baht, private pool, everything that you could want. The house was amazing. Fantastic construction, great views. But for Thailand, I guess that's a lot of money. But houses did sell like that. I'd seen lots, so I just hoped these would sell. Coming close to the end of 2017, the 2 houses are sat there for sale, and no work is progressing on any of the others. Some of the other projects that the company is working on have come to a halt, but they're still working on one. How did my lawyer not pick up on the fact that they were doing this? He said he'd spoken to the company. I mean, he was there when I was there with them. He was speaking to the directors, asking them all sorts of questions. How was it not made aware that they were working on other projects? He told me that the financials were fine. He didn't tell me anything other than there was nothing wrong with the company. That was when I first realized that investing in Thailand is a different game altogether than investing at home. I've met people at this point who had invested in the property market in Phuket and made fortunes. I guess they were lucky. Did they do more due diligence than me? There is a chance that they did, but maybe they were just lucky. Not being able to speak the language was a huge barrier. Not really understanding the rules in as much depth as I did at home was another barrier. But I was drawn to the way of life there. I was drawn to Thailand, and at this point, I am starting to worry that the company is going to completely fold. My lawyer informed me that the company had debts. I wondered why he hadn't told me originally. He said apparently they'd hidden them from him. Do we have any legal recourse against them, I asked. In theory, yes. In practice, no. It's just not worth it, he said. You could be stuck in the court for years, spending a fortune. Things could go in your favour, and then it could be stuck in appeal for years. And then, even if it goes your favour, and they don't give you the money, there's not really much you can do. He told me not to panic too much, because things may turn around. They may make a few sales and get on with construction, but they had too many projects going on, and it was then that I actually met up with someone who had invested in another one of the projects. For him, he'd only invested 3 million baht. He said he invested the same before and it worked, but this time he lost all hope. Talk about finding yourself in a nightmare scenario. I tried to say, just give me one of the houses in the project that's already built, but that wasn't part of the agreement, so they wouldn't do that. If they did that, there was no chance of them getting any money to finish any of the projects. I didn't know that their situation was so precarious. If my lawyer told me, maybe I would. I remember bad advice I was given once by a solicitor in England. I had a listed building, and the solicitor informed me that I was legally allowed to change the single-pane wooden windows for plastic double glazing. I was informed that this was within my rights, and I didn't need planning permission for it. So I had the work done, replacing all the windows in the house, only to be told not long after by the council that I wasn't allowed to do that. I should have applied for planning permission, and I probably wouldn't have got it because it was a listed building. I had to replace them all at great expense, but I was able to sue the solicitor for bad advice that they gave me. But when I contacted another lawyer in Thailand, asking if I could sue the lawyer who had given me bad advice, he just looked at me and said, "You could try. You probably are going to lose more money, so it's probably not worth it." It was that made me realise Thailand was just a Wild West. Things can work and money can be made, but if things go wrong, you've not really got any recourse to be able to do anything to put them right. Perhaps I should have just bought a house instead of trying to make some money, but I'd always been a person who wanted to make money, and I'd done it all my life. Why was it going to be different in Thailand? We stuck it out though. We stayed there while waiting and waiting and waiting some more. But by midway through 2018, the company said that without any more investment, it's going to go under, and the projects are going to have to be sold off, and anyone who was due money should get something back, but it's probably not going to be anything close to the amount they put in. I was devastated. I blame myself. It's no one else to blame. Well, apart from the lawyer who didn't give me the right advice, and the company who didn't tell me they were working on more than one project. But did I ask them if they were working on other projects? I didn't. Did I ask the lawyer to check absolutely everything? I did, but I didn't know what they had to check, so that was the thing. I just thought he would do everything that was needed, and it seemed that he did. We spent a few years in Thailand, invested 25 million baht, and when we understood that the game was up, we went back to England, because I wanted to do something that I knew I wouldn't get stuck on. I kept in touch with the lawyer, but years go by, and nothing, and then the pandemic happened, which meant there was no chance anything was going to happen for the foreseeable future. During the pandemic, we just stayed at home. I'll admit to being very fortunate for the house I had. Staying at home all the time wasn't a chore. I had my indoor pool, but I can't help continue to think about what happened in Thailand all throughout COVID. I look at the houses that have been built on the land I sold and think that lucky deal I had to sell the land, I basically just gave all that money away. I should have brought more rentals, but I didn't, and I can't go back. The pandemic comes to an end, 2022 rolls round and nothing, 2023 rolls around, and I get a call from the lawyer to say that all the assets of the company have been transferred to another one. They have got more investment, and they should start construction again soon. But based on my agreement, and I invested in the old company, there were clauses that said if anything happened to the company, I wouldn't get back my full investment. I wasn't expecting to get anything back, but I was persistent, even though I was in England at the time, and I did find out that the new company did have obligations to the old investors, but it turns out that that was only for 10% of the initial amount. I don't know where they got that figure from, or why that was the case, or why we got something, but I was given back 2.5 million baht in 2024. That project that we invested in was completed by the other company, and the house that we should have had I saw listed for 48 million baht. Don't know if they sold it, but it was the biggest mistake of my life. The perils of investing in Thailand. It's a lesson I learned and something I'll never do again, but I can't get any more of the money back. I'd like to think I'm older and wiser. Lived a great life up until now, but I hate that I lost that money. It's not so much about the money, it's about the fact that I lost, and that was the first time I ever lost, and I guess it was only because I was in Thailand and it's not my home. My wife is still wonderful. We have 2 great kids, and I don't need to work, but I do spend time doing the odd renovation when I can. I have added to my rental portfolio another 2 houses through hard work, not by luck. For anyone who says you don't need more than 1 house, there's always one of those guys. I'm considering getting rid of everything. It's becoming harder and harder to be a landlord in England. Rules changing all the time, new taxes, lots of things seem to get in the way. People fail to understand that I'm providing houses for people. The government isn't. Someone has to, and I've always loved property. I've recently had my main house valued, £2.3 million. I'm not complaining, but that loss in Thailand still stings. We were in Phuket 3 or 4 months ago, and we went to look at the project. How things could have been. We should have had a stunning house in paradise, but it's not like we can't live in a house like that if we wanted one. We just couldn't own it without selling what we have. Be careful if you do business in Thailand. Be careful if you invest in Thailand. I've met so many people who have made fortunes in Thailand, but I've also met people who have lost fortunes, and usually it's not because they were stupid or blasé. I'm addicted to listening to the stories you have on the channel. It makes me feel good about myself, but I'm not as stupid as some of the guys who lost everything. I spent months doing due diligence on a project in Thailand, paid a great lawyer a lot of money to do everything he should have done, believing that it was his job to tell me absolutely everything. I didn't realise just how different things were to home, and while we got a little bit of money back, it was just a drop in the ocean from what we invested. I wasn't expecting anything, so at least we have to be thankful for that.